Eve.
And joining us now, former U.S. Attorney Mike Hurst. Mike, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Gerard. Great to be here.
Well, I know you sent me a note this morning, said, hey, what do you want to talk about? And I sent you like a book, and I apologize for that. But every time I'd send you something, oh, yeah, but there's one more thing. So
No, there's a lot going on, for sure.
There is a lot going on. But you also sent me, we'll go ahead and kick it off with this, an article that you just authored.
Yeah.
About an individual that influenced you and is right here in our backyard.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah, incredible, man. Dr. John Perkins, for you guys who don't know him, please, I would recommend go to Magnolia Tribune and check out the article. But just one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. Born in poverty down in Lawrence County in 1930. He's 93, just celebrated his 93rd birthday last Friday. He and his wife been married for 72 years.
Golly.
Think about that for a second, just that alone. But just someone who came to know the Lord later in life through his son going to Bible school and just has been on fire for the Lord. He likes to tell folks, he comes from a family of sharecroppers who were gamblers and bootleggers, and just the way that the Lord has poured into him and the way he's been a shining light for people, not just here in Mississippi, but throughout the world, literally throughout the world. He's just changed people's lives. And I had the opportunity to meet him back in 2015 when I was running for Attorney General, and just went to a Bible study at his house at 5:30 a.m. in West Jackson on Tuesday morning. And I had no idea stepping into that room that morning that my life would change forever. And he's the real deal, Gerard. If we had more love, if we had more forgiveness, if we had more just the pouring out of the grace and mercy that the Lord has told us, but the way he walks and the way he does it is just it's refreshing. I mean, our country, our world would be much better if we did more like Dr. Perkins.
Well, and I read in your article, you talked about really some injustices that were done to him. And I'm going to let you describe those. But what struck me is that despite that, he still has a positive attitude about life, about people, and he, of all people, maybe should be a little more sour, right?
Yeah.
And he's not, but yet we have people that are mad because they don't have a safe space,
right.
or some crap like that.
Right.
This is a guy that had to deal with stuff that's unthinkable. Tell us about it.
Yeah, he back in the civil rights era, let me back up even further. When he was 16 years old, his brother had just come back from World War II, was a veteran, and I won't go into details, but in one of his books, he describes it. His brother was going to the movies one day, had an altercation with a sheriff's deputy, and the sheriff's deputy shot and killed him. And nothing was ever done. Nothing happened. Dr. Perkins moved to California. His family was scared for his life. And when he came back to Mississippi and he organized and tried to fight for justice and civil rights, that included helping with protests and helping some Tougaloo students who were protesting. Well, on Highway 49, he's picked up, the Tougaloo students were picked up on Highway 49, taken to the Brandon jail, and Dr. Perkins, another man, went to visit the students at the jail where he was assaulted and beaten unconscious. And not only beaten unconscious by corrupt law enforcement at the time, but also forced to mop up and clean up his own blood in the jail because they were the corrupt law enforcement were fearing the federal investigators were coming to look into the matter. So, as you said, if anyone could be mad at law enforcement, mad at the world, just mad at what has happened to him in his life, it would be him, but he's not.
Yeah.
And he's just full of love. And the irony to me is here I was, a federal prosecutor. Here I was running for attorney general. Here I was, became the chief federal law enforcement officer for half of our state. And this man who had been abused and his rights had just been destroyed by corrupt law enforcement loved someone like me.
Unbelievable.
It really is. And I just shout out to him and his family for all they're doing, especially for Jackson and West Jackson. They recently put on a little baseball camp for some boys over there. I know they're involved with a lot of youth educational activities over there, and just hats off to the Perkins and the entire family.
It's incredible, and I appreciate you writing the story. And I think we on the right, a lot of times, Mike, we get accused of wanting to just hide all this sort of stuff. and these injustices. I mean, you called out the law enforcement, and certainly from the accounts you wrote, it does sound like they were corrupt. I don't see how you conclude anything but that. And during that era, that's sort of common.
Yep.
We acknowledge that. We accept that. We don't have a problem with teaching this, with exposing this. We're not looking to conceal it, but we also have to recognize that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not aware of situations.
Well, it does happen today. I mean, I would tell you as a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted corrupt law enforcement. I prosecuted,
But not to the widespread extent it was then.
No, absolutely not. But I just, I'm as pro-law enforcement as they come. I was a federal prosecutor for 15 years. I worked hand in glove with police of all different shades and agencies. But at the end of the day, I mean, every agency, I had a buddy of mine in the military who I admire, I honor, I look up to. I frankly regret I didn't serve our country in the military, but I had a buddy of mine who was a longtime military service member and retired, and he said, look, the military is just like church, it's just like law enforcement, it's just like every piece of society. It's made up of human beings. And we are all sinful, and there are all some who are corrupt.
Sure.
And it's going to happen in whatever. So we can't put the military or our church or law enforcement on a pedestal that they're perfect, because they're not. Because as long as human beings are involved, they're going to be corrupt. But the issue is we have to stand up and call out, as you said, acknowledge the failings of human beings when they do fail in these different entities or organizations, and just hold them accountable. And by doing that, we do make them better, and we make our entire society better.
Agree. And I think maybe I misspoke in that what I see out of the left is this belief that every single interaction that involves a white police officer and a black perpetrator is unjust, is corrupt.
Right.
Every single one.
It's the narrative from the left of the systemic nature of it. And it's not systemic. It's not systemic.
It's isolated. They're bad guys.
Absolutely.
But you don't have a problem prosecuting them and calling them out and applying the law.
And frankly, if we did not do that as a society, as a country, if those were not our values and our principles, who would we be? We would not be the United States of America. That's what we have to do. We have to hold anybody who has violated the law, and I mean anybody, held to account.
Totally agree. And I think that clear-eyed, rational people on the right believe that.
Absolutely.
I think we believe that.
And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I think clear-eyed, rational people on the left
I agree.
that.
Problem is they don't speak up as much because their group will absolutely ostracize them, will hang them out to dry, and that's a problem as well because they want to politicize our institutions for personal political gain, in which turns me to the Hunter Biden thing, speaking about inequitable application of the law.
Well, and we on the conservative movement, we have to be careful because those who have violated the law, we have to hold them accountable, and we can't look the other way. We can't take up for them. You know, what concerns me right now is the demonization of law enforcement coming from the right, and like we've just talked about, there are absolutely bad actors in law enforcement
because they're human beings.
And a bunch but at the same time, we can't fall into this trap I think the left is setting for us, which is the same thing they did and messed up by saying defund the police. I think they're trying to get us to do the same thing with the FBI and others.
Okay.
There are some in the FBI, again, because they are made up of human beings who are sinful. There are some in the FBI that absolutely did not do what they should have done, did not follow the protocol, did not do the right thing. But at the same time, to say the entire institution and all of federal law enforcement is somehow corrupt, I think is the wrong way to go. They're not corrupt.
I would say that the testimony from the various whistleblowers exemplifies that.
Absolutely.
I mean, because they're coming, and they thought and prayed about that a long time.
They have to. Their lives are on the line.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so they've come out and shed even more light on this whole ordeal as recent as yesterday on the Hill there. So with the investigation.
The Hunter Biden thing is interesting, though, because, on the one hand, the misdemeanor, I think it's a failure to file is what he was charged with, the misdemeanor tax charge. That's primarily driven by the tax loss and the sentencing guidelines. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but there's usually a guideline range for that type of prison. I've prosecuted that type of case multiple times, and a lot of times people do go to prison for those misdemeanors, even though they can stack. If say you're charged with 6 misdemeanors, you can only be sent to prison for under a year. You can actually stack those 6 misdemeanors and be going to prison for up to 6 years.
And the people that commit those crimes, as you know, having prosecuted, they come from all walks of life.
The real concern I have is with the gun charge, because that is something that I, frankly, have never seen a deferred prosecution agreement with regard to a gun charge.
Let's dig into that when we come back. We've got Mike Hurst, former U.S. Attorney, in the Element Wealth Studio. Stay with us. We're back with Mike Hurst, former U.S. Attorney, in the Element Wealth Studios. Rhino, I'm looking at some breaking news about the submarine that they've located a debris field.
Yeah, that was just announced about 20 minutes ago now that a debris field has been found on the ocean floor near the wreck of the Titanic.
Wow.
And if you haven't been keeping up, it has already passed the timetable for available breathable oxygen for the people on the sub. Wow. So they're still not calling it a recovery effort. It's still search and rescue, but it is looking grim.
Yeah, man, appreciate that. So, Mike, before we went to break, we were talking about this Hunter Biden tax case, but there's also a gun aspect of this as well. Tell us about that.
Right. I mean, under federal law, if you're a drug user, not addiction, not rehab, if you're a drug user, you're prohibited from possessing a firearm. So in that case, as I understand it from reading the media, is the U.S. Attorney's Office entered into what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, which means they will file a charge against you. But if you agree to do certain things over a 2-3 year period under this little contract they have, basically just staying out of trouble, don't violate the law, all these other conditions, then after that 2 or 3 year period, they will dismiss that pending charge against you.
Okay.
Deferred prosecution. The question, there are a lot of questions with this. One is, I mentioned right before we went off the radio, we prosecuted a number of these types of crimes in the Southern District of Mississippi, especially on our Mississippi Gulf Coast. A number of drug users who are found in possession of firearms. That's a common charge. I've seen deferred prosecution agreements primarily in white collar type cases where, let's say an employee of a company who could be considered an agent of a company has committed a crime, and you could hold the company liable for that crime, but because the company didn't, know about it or didn't condone it or didn't do anything, you entered into a deferred prosecution agreement with that company.
Sure.
Here it's weird because it's a gun case. And again, I just have never seen a deferred prosecution on a gun case. As I mentioned to you at the break, the only thing I can think of is there's some question in the academic community right now as to whether that federal crime that's been on the books probably 30, 40 years, whether it is constitutional. And the reason that has come up is because recently the Fifth Circuit overturned a federal law as unconstitutional, which prohibited someone who had been convicted of a domestic violence offense from possessing a firearm. That was recently overturned, and there's question about now and that was overturned by using the Dobbs analysis. And what that means is, in the Dobbs case, the Supreme Court went back and looked at the history and traditions of our country when to understand whether abortion should be a constitutional right, and it found it is not based upon the history traditions. Well, now the courts are looking at history and traditions with regard to other constitutional rights. In this case, the Second Amendment. Okay. And when that Fifth Circuit case, they overturned that federal law, and I think that's probably a concern here. Probably the U.S. Attorney's Office did not want the Hunter Biden to be the one who is potentially overturning federal law and finding this particular federal crime unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's just so fascinating, but it does make sense. It's almost as if the Dobbs case kind of opened up this logjam, and now I guess the lawyers and the constitutionalists are doing a deep dive into this to really see what's legal, what's constitutional.
After Dobbs, it's a huge question in the legal community as to taking the approach Supreme Court did with Dobbs. And look, we have been praying for abortion to be overturned. I am so excited and I'm so appreciative of the Supreme Court actually following the law in Dobbs, as they did not follow it in Roe v. Wade and Casey and those others. But right now, the legal community is looking around saying, hey, if you take this approach the Supreme Court did in Dobbs, looking at history and tradition, what other laws, rights, what have you, could potentially be under the gun. And right now, the Fifth Circuit is asking for legal scholars, anyone in the legal community, basically to submit briefs with regard to a question as to the Second Amendment and intoxicated or impaired individuals. So this is going to continue to percolate and to boil up as courts continue to grapple with it.
So we could literally end up with a situation where we get some rulings that say you can't prohibit anybody from, I guess there would be some limitations, but I don't know what those would be.
Again, it depends on which courts are going to really use this approach the Supreme Court took with Dobbs and apply it to the laws that are in effect right now.
That makes sense. Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so we're probably going to have just a whole series of cases come out as a result of
but,
this.
it's fascinating, but it's also encouraging from a conservative perspective, because if you remember during the Warren Court and during the 60s, there were so many expansions of, new court-made laws, court being just going off on a tangent with no basis in the law, no basis in the Constitution, no basis in fact to invent these new rights. And so to be able to pull that back and to say, hey, we as a country, our principles are we are relying on the Constitution, we're relying on our democratic elected officials to pass laws that that are confined to the Constitution. I think that's a good thing.
Well, I do too, because that period of time you're describing is sort of gave rise to the so-called activist courts, where judges were kind of ruling and courts were handing down decisions that were more consistent with their personal philosophy, and their opinion, rather than the Constitution.
That's right. I mean, it's you have to, it's the eternal debate in the legal world where is it a living Constitution or do the words actually mean what they say? Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we're going to be looking out for that. And then we've got this case. You heard me discussing it before we started our interview, and that's in Arkansas, where they have the court has struck down the transgender care law that was passed I believe in January in the state of Arkansas on minors, making it prohibiting it, I should say. Now the court says, no, that's unconstitutional. So is this going to become a topic of discussion, a matter for the courts as to whether or not minor transgender surgery is a constitutional right?
Right. Yeah, it's incredible to believe that this Obama-appointed district judge down there, who ironically his father was a district judge in Arkansas as well, so a long history of judicial activism in that family. But it's concerning because the media especially portrays this as, quote, care.
Right, like abortion. That's reproductive care.
And I like what Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders said when that decision came out. She said, this is activists pushing a political agenda at the expense of our kids. That's exactly what it is. I mean, I think I told you, I heard someone say it. One of the best analogies I heard is, my kid is, not my kid, but this person was saying, my kid is 6 years old. He's infatuated with pirates right now, but I'm not taking him to the doctor to cut off his hand and put a hook on it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's good.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Kids are fascinated with everything, but because they're kids. But at the same time, we as parents have an obligation, we have a duty to raise them the right way. And just because a kid thinks they're a fairy, we're not going to let them jump off the roof.
Right.
So we have to take care of our kids. We have to affirm them as children. We have to affirm them as their biological sex. And anything outside of that it's hard to justify, especially from a legal or a medical sense.
Well, don't you feel that government, society in general, has a duty to intervene and protect?
Absolutely. I mean, we as a society have intervened and protect our kids when parents abuse children, when any adult abuses children. We have laws to that. Why our courts cannot uphold similar type laws here where, parents are doing ungodly things with regard to sex, I just can't even imagine.
It's scary, and this account I read an interview with a physician who basically said that the comeback always is, well, this will prevent suicide. That the child is having these fuzzy feelings about their gender, and they're considering suicide if they're not allowed, or they ultimately will commit suicide if they're not allowed. And what he says is, the reality is here, these individuals, these youngsters, they hate themselves. They have hatred for themselves. And what they need is psychiatric care to deal with that. And I think it's no secret that a lot of kids go through situations in their life where they experience those feelings of hate for themselves. That there's been rejection, dejection, despair, etc.
And I think at one point in our lives, all of us have. The problem that we have right now, and especially as a father of 6, the thing that breaks my heart is it is amplified for children now just because we have phones. We have ubiquitous access to everything that is going on in the world simultaneously.
Yes.
And it's amplifying that depression, it's amplifying that concern, it's amplifying that self-hate. And what we need to do as parents, and look, I'm no perfect parent by any means. My kids will tell you that. But what we need to do as parents is lean into that and be more of those role models that we're supposed to be.
Totally agree.
Not allowing the phones or the iPads or the internet raise our kids.
I totally agree. And then the other thing we need, of course, is more parents involved.
Absolutely. First and foremost.
Yeah. Mike, always good to talk to you.
Thanks.
I appreciate you coming in. Always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerard.
Mike Hurst, former U.S. Attorney, has been our guest in the Element Wealth Studio.